okay, predominantly church Christian context. And we talked about his other works aside from his commentary on the Torah, the most famous of them being his commentary on 30 out of 39 of the Masechtot of the Talmud. There he is extremely local in his Perush and Pshat oriented. Okay. Then we talked about his commentary on Tanakh. We talked about what made it so unique and what makes it, why it sort of caught like wildfire, basically, some of the characteristics. And again, one of the very important things that we're going to stress is, hold on, I gotta move you guys because it's not working for me. Whoa. Hold on one sec. Okay, that's good. Is that he was really in the middle between the school of the Darshanim and the Patranim. And obviously, he's changed the impact of all future Parshanot. Okay. Then we started talking about some of the characteristics of his commentary. Number one and most prominent is his idea that he's giving you the rabbinic pshat. He's giving you the Chazal interpreted Torah through Midrashim, through Ma'amare Chazal, through Talmudic quotes, and his desire for Pishuto Shel Mikra. We're going to get to that. That's going to take up a lot of our time. So we'll jump now to that section which was here, which we're basically saying that Rashi is a rewriter, an editor, a filterer of Midrashim. We gave some examples right here. He takes the Sugya and Masechet Sotah and just sort of copies and pastes pieces of it and creates a mahalach in the story. And then we had here where Rashi gives us his quote-unquote mission statement where he says, right, the famous Ani lo bati ela lefishuto shel mikra ula agada hameyashevet digvrei hamikra devar davur al ofnav, right? I am here to explain pishuto shel mikra and to bring agadot that meyashev divrei hamikra. And in the Shir Hashrim, he says something similar, gracias. And we're going to be looking at some examples here. Teddy loves it. Teddy's cracking up. Okay. Rashi's selection, we looked at this one last year, he has a choice between Midrashim, and we saw why, or we gave an explanation as to why Rashi chose this Midrash over the other one, even though it sort of paints Bnei Israel in a more negative light. And we said because of the word Vayasa literally means to cause to move, and also the continuation of and they complain that overall the context and the wording makes this midrash more plausible as being the pshat and pisukim. And even when he's quoting the midrash, look, if you notice, he's rewording it not to bring down the whole thing, but to make it a little bit more easily reader friendly. Let's put it like that. Okay, that's where we left off last time. Now we're starting today. We're going to be entering into really continuing with this theme, and we're going to bring a couple of different examples. I realize that it's probably best if we get some audience participation here also. So I'm just going to go in the order of how you appear in my camera. So Isaac, you're going to read this first pasuk and read the Rashi on it. And here we have an example of Rashi quoting Chazal, but disagreeing. So go ahead. Explain it also,
ותרד בת פרעה לרחוץ על היאור, ונערותיה הולכות על יד היאור, ותראה את התיבה בתוך הסוף, ותשלח את אמתה ותיקחיה.
Good. So what does pasuk mean?
That Bat Paro descended to go wash in the yaor, in the river. ונערותיה הולכות על יד היאור, and her maids, her girls are with her. ותראה את התיבה, and she sees the basket בתוך הסוף, inside of the river. ותשלח את אמתה ותיקחיה, and she sent away her amata, so either her girls or
something. Amata is going to be the point under contention here. What does that mean? Vatikahya, and she took it, meaning she took the teva. Good. So how does Rashi mefaresh et amata?
Et shivhata.
Good. The word in Hebrew amma, right? Amma ivriya means it's the female word for an eved. an amma. Okay. The Rabbotenu Darshu.
רבותינו דרשו לשון יד. אבל לפי דקדוק לשון הקודש, היה לו...
Hold on, before we get to that, how do they get to yad? Because what?
Like amma, like the measurement of
like
the
an
hand.
arm, right? Yeah, like an arm is called an amma. Like with Noach, we have 50 amma rochba, 30 amma komata. Good.
אבל לפי דקדוק לשון הקודש, היה לו להינקד אמתה מם דגושה.
Good. If it was an amma, the arm would have had to be ammata with a dagesh in the mem, like we have in Noach, right? Shloshim amma koma, right? It's a very strong emphasis on the mem because that it's replacing a letter. Behem darshu et amata et yada. And what's the drasha? Shenishtar beba amata amot harbe. That her arm extended, really like became, almost like jelly, right? Amot harbe, right? It extended many amot. Okay. Good. So here you have Rashi bringing down with the drasha of Chachamim, but disagreeing with it and saying, according to that perush, all right, the word should have been written ammata. Now, you could say to yourself, hold on one second. You just told me, Rashi, right? Ani lo ba'ati ela lepishuto shel mikra v'la agada hamiyashev divrei hamikra. So why did you bring this? You told me you're going to bring me pishuto shel mikra. So why did you bring the second half? Just tell me et amata et shivchata. So here is where we reach a point where we have a machloket about how to understand Rashi, a machloket about Rashi himself, about when he's not bringing a midrash for pishuto shel mikra. Here's a great example because he says it straight out that it doesn't seem to be the pishuto shel mikra because amata means that shivchata. So why is he doing that? So one school of thought, and this is the dominating school of thought amongst the earlier Mefarshim Rashi, is Rashi brought this midrash because there's a problem with his perush. There's something insufficient about this, et shivchata. And what do they say? As Isaac very nicely translated, in the beginning he calls them na'arot. Why did it say vatishlach et amata? It should have said vatishlach et na'arata, right? The fact that the Torah changes the word in the second half of the pasuk is telling me it must not mean shivchata, right? So even when Rashi is telling you that they're bringing the lashon of Chazal because he wants you to, there's still we want to say something in the pisukim that is motivating him to bring forth this perush of Chazal. Meaning even his pshat is there's some problem with it, and therefore he brings forth the drasha. Good. So now we have another piece. This is in Parashat Pinchas when we're going through the what's it called? The census. And here Rashi brings down the perush of or the drasha of Rabbi Moshe Haradashan. Umatzati biyesodo shel Rabbi Moshe Haradash yarda iman leMitzrayim k'shayta meorevet mehem, right? Me'oberet mehem. Sorry. What's the problem in this pasuk is that in general the Mikra only counts the first generation of Yordei Mitzrayim as the families, and here it's not doing that. So he says because she was pregnant when she went down. So that's what he brings down. And now Rashi says like this: if this is we'll call it a rabbinic tradition, an agadah, a historical fact that the Chachamim are telling us, cluing us in on, then I'll accept it, meaning it's good, meaning there's nothing I can say on it. V'im lav, and if it's not, omer ani, and then he gives his own perush as to the thing. Now, what do you see from here? You see two things from here, and when we get to the Ibn Ezra, we're going to see this as well, is when it comes to Agadah, you have to really divide it into two categories. We have to divide, one is the authority of the Agadah. The authority of the Agadah rests on what the Agadah is about. If the Agadah is about a historical fact, not a midrash necessarily explaining a missing link in a story, but a historical fact, right? The Agadah says this is this. Okay, ready? Ivsan is Boaz, right? The Midrash says that the second Shofet, Ivsan, was really the same person as Boaz. So if they're telling you that because that's just the Misorah that they had, that's the tradition that they had, then what are you going to say, Rashi, right? Well, Rashi has to just say, okay, that's what they're telling me. I don't have, that must have been a tradition that they have. There's no logic here. There's no Pishuto Shel Mikra involved here. However, if it's a matter of explaining the Pshat of the Pesukim, and this is one explanation of the Pshat of the Pesukim, they came up with this theory, but they're not relating a historical fact, then I'll give my own perush and I'll say that this is more likely. So he accepts the authority of the Agadah, being the rabbis, and he accepts that completely. But again, it's going to depend on what the nature of their comment is. If it's a historical type of comment that they're just making an historical identification, then again, what is he to say? However, if it's an interpretation of Pesukim, what's the most likely outcome of scenarios, and this is one possibility, then he has something to say. Okay. Good. The same thing here, by the way. He obviously didn't think that the Chachamim were telling you, yeah, we have a tradition that Bat Paro didn't send one of her shivachot, right? He understands that they're reading Amata and understanding the word Amata to mean hand, Darshu Lashon Yad, right? In which case he's saying, if that's what they're saying, it doesn't make sense because it should have been Mem de Gusha. Okay. So what are Rashi's motivating factors? We did some in the previous slide. Now, Shomer, take it away. So first thing is going to be difficulty in a pasuk. This is number one, right? What's bothering Rashi in the pasuk? There's something missing. There's some internal contradiction. So let's give a nice example of this. Vayim sa'ehu ish. This is when Yaakov sends Yosef to search for his brothers. And Yosef is wandering away in the middle of nowhere. Go.
וימצאהו איש והנה טועה בשדה וישאלהו האיש לאמור מה תבקש ויאמר את אחי אנוכי מבקש הגידה נא לי איפה הם רואים.
Good. So anytime we have in the Torah an unidentified person, it's automatically going to be ripe for midrashic. They're just going to, it's like fuel to the fire. It's like, oh, we got someone, and we're going to see in the next couple of slides even more, right? Vayim sa'ehu ish. Now, it would have been even better for the midrash if it said ha'ish, but that's a different situation, right? Vayim sa'ehu ish. A man finds him. V'hineh to'eh basodeh. Yosef is wandering. V'yishalehu ha'ish. And here we go, ha'ish. Lemor ma tevakesh. You ask him, what do you want? V'yomer et achai anochi mevakesh. Hagida na li efo em roim. And for some reason, Yosef assumes that this person has knowledge as to his brother's whereabouts, right? He doesn't know anything about him except that he's a wandering person in the desert. So for both those reasons reason number one is Vayim sa'ehu ha'ish. I didn't point that out. He found him. You don't usually use the word found unless someone is looking for something, right? You wouldn't say, if I bumped into you on the street, I wouldn't say, I found you. I would say, I bumped into you on the street, right? I wouldn't say, I found you wandering. I would say, I saw you wandering, right? So the fact that it says Vayim sa'ehu ha'ish, he found him, and that Yosef automatically assumes that this person that he found him has knowledge as to his brother's whereabouts, both of those problems lead Rashi to say, Ish, Shomer?
Zehu, it's supposed to say Zehu?
Zehu, yeah, Zeh Gabriel, it should say.
Zeh Gabriel.
Why? Because the Pasuk in Daniel says, Va'ish Gabriel. So Rashi just needs something to tell me why it's, right, these are the two problems in the Pesukim, and they're both easily answered by saying this person isn't a person. It's a person that looks like, it's an angel that looks like a person. Where else do we have a concept like that? In Daniel, and it makes a complete, transitive property identification. V'ha'ish Gabriel. Gabriel wasn't an ish. I know, he was a malach, but they call him an ish. Okay, a malach called an ish. Boom, I have another situation where a malach is called an ish. Good? Now, just to contrast this with the Ibn Ezra, Shomer, read how the Ibn Ezra just completely doesn't go with this at all, right? Right, one of the people that was just walking. What does he do with these problems? So that's going to be perhaps another, we're going to talk about it in general, but there's a fundamental disagreement between, we'll say Ibn Ezra and Rashi, but it's really two completely different schools of thought about the way the Torah is written and the extent to which we say Dibra Torah Kelshon Bnei Adam, that the Torah was written in the way humans speak, right? According to the Ibn Ezra, the Torah is just telling you the man found him. Okay, he found him, he bumped into him. No, don't get all worked up, right? A lot of times in Navi, and even in the Torah itself, right? The Radak or Ibn Ezra will say kafal ha'inyan b'milim shonot. They're repeating the same thing with different words. Rashi, double words, you can't even fathom such a concept. Repeating the same thing with double words, that doesn't make any sense, right? The whole point of the Torah is that every word is omni-significant, right? Completely significant. So there's a fundamental disagreement as to how to read the words when you're reading the story. Is it like you read just the story, you get the general, and like, okay, you might make a diuk here, make a diuk there, but in general, I need the story to make sense, and because it's Dibrat Torah Kelshon Bnei Adam, or is it every single element of the story needs to have, everything needs to be filled in for? And we're going to see more in the next slide, more instances of this. Okay, next one, Shomer.
ויהי בימים הרבים ההם וימות מלך מצרים. וינחו בני ישראל מן העבודה, ויזעקו בתעל שבתם אל האלוהים מן העבודה.
Good. So you have a pasuk. In those days, the king of Mitzrayim died. This is when they're already servants, already slaves, not servants, slaves. And Bnei Israel cry out from the work, right? They're more anguished from the work, and they scream out to God because of the backbreaking labor. Now that's a strange thing because it just said that the king died. The king that's enslaving them died. The next thing the pasuk says is, and Bnei Israel cried out of the brutalness of their labor. So if you're a Pashtan, you'll say, maybe, for the first time in a while, they had a change in, the king died. Maybe they thought things were going to get better and they didn't get better, so that made them cry out. Or the new king was worse. You could have all sorts of Pashtan ways to connect this. But Rashi is not satisfied with any of them because they're not in the words. This seems to be that something happened to the king and that it made the work and everything worse. So what does Rashi say? Vayamot melech Mitzrayim. Shouldn't be there, go.
נסתרה והיה שוחט תינוקות ישראל ורוחץ בדמם.
Rashi says, Vayamot melech, it doesn't mean he died. It means he got sarat, which is a form of death. Right? How do we know it's a form of death? When Miriam gets sarat, what does the pasuk say? When Moshe prays for her, Al na ki kamet, asher, na ki kamet. Don't let her be like that person. Need water.
Show me you're reading beautifully.
Thank you, Isaac. You also read beautiful.
Where you learn to read like that?
I don't know. Maggie David.
Eddie, I should have taken it originally. When it was offered to me. I said I should have taken it originally when it was offered to me.
Water what you asked the first time.
What?
You should have. That's what you get.
I know. Okay. So Nistareya, he got sarat. And why is that? Now, why are Bnei Israel crying out? Because in order to cure his sarat, he would go around killing the babies of Bnei Israel and wash them himself in their blood. So you read this Midrash and this Rashi and you say, how is that more pshat than anything? But again, let's put it like this. It might not be pshat if you're asking, if I read this pasuk only, what would I conclude if I just read it like that, right? It might not be that would be the most likely conclusion that I would come up with. However, giving the general context, and then connecting the Pisukim, you would say, okay, there has to be some sort of connection. And I also, remember the Midrash, Machlokot over there. Is it a new king? Is it not a new king? So the precedent already exists for saying the king didn't really die. Right? Meaning there's a new king. Not a real new king, but it's the same king. Melech Hadash. Yeah, he's not really a Melech Hadash, right? Meaning to say, what happens to this king doesn't really matter. Okay, fine. Next.
Wait, Ed.
Yeah.
Could we delve deeper into that one?
Go for it.
Well, I don't have much of a question, but it just what Rashi's motive was to go really. He went far on that one.
Okay.
I just would like to know more characteristics of Rashi, why he would do so.
Who's he quoting here?
It's a good question. I assume it's a midrash. The truth is, I could look it up right now. I will. I assume it's some Tanchuma or some. I think it's Perek Bet. It's Perek Bet Kav Gimel. Let me look it up right now. It is.
Okay.
It's Shemot Rabbah. Yeah.
So I guess my question is, if say that she thought of not even as just your pshat saying that maybe they thought it would get better and it didn't, or the other king was worse. Why did he choose this whole drasha over it?
So I think in general, Rashi is inclined to, if he's going to give his own peshat, it has to be justified in the text, like we saw with this one right here, right? If he has a drasha of the Chachamim, but he says it really doesn't work in the words. The words don't make it work. Amata is not with the mem degusha. However, here, if he's to say my pshat, that's conjecture. And then once it's conjecture, and the Chachamim is conjecture, I'll go with the Chachamim's conjecture because it's not impossible in the words, and it does explain very nicely the connection between Vayamot Melech Mitzrayim v'Yanachu b'nei Yisrael min ha'avodah v'Yizak. Meaning it explains why after the king died it got worse, because he didn't actually die, and the thing that made him die made their condition worse, because now he was upgrading his punishment, so to speak.
But it's also conjecture.
What?
It's also conjecture, right?
Good, but it's based off of Divrei Chachamim. It's a midrash.
The point is that it's also conjecture, not just that it's the only conjecture.
What do you mean?
Because you said your pshat was also conjecture.
Okay.
And once they're both, I'm agreeing with you. Once they're both, you might as well go with the Chachamim.
Right. And again, I don't think what Rashi is saying here is that the Chachamim had a tradition that's what happened. I think also we have to keep in mind that it's, let's just put it like this. There are other kings in the Jewish history of Goyim kings who got Sarat and Jewish kings who got Sarat. It's not something that's flying out of left field, right? And the Torah self-identifies Sarat as being a death. Tumat Sarat is the only other Tumah that's Tumat Met. Aharon says, Al Natahi Kamet, right? There are a lot of connections between death and Sarat. So, again, we're not answering the question here of whether or not, the Ibn Ezra, for example, would not say this, because the Ibn Ezra is not reading the pasuk with the same lenses. They're completely different lenses on. They're not reading the pasuk with, if I read this pasuk, what do I think happened? You read this pasuk, you think the king died. That's it. You just read it and you go on, the king died. But if you analyze, Rashi's not reading pasukim. He's analyzing pasukim. And he's saying it doesn't there's something missing here. There's something that I'm missing from the storyline, right? And again, you might assume also from the continuation of the story, we have no, right? If my memory serves correctly, we don't have any, grand new proclamations from a new king or stuff like that. You would think that something like that would usher in some, funeral, something else to happen, but nothing else happened. Just he died and then it got worse and then moving on. I mean, not moving on, but continuing the story. So all these are, pieces to the puzzle. And what I think he's saying is, and what I think we all have to realize sometimes is when Chazal make a comment like that, they're not just making a comment. We're saying it's conjecture. It's conjecture, but it's conjecture with the knowledge of the entire context of not just this local story. in Shemot, but really of all of Tanakh, and the associations and the halachot and all the different interconnections of Torah that they're making this comment. So it's better, it's on more solid ground than our conjecture, right? So that's what I would say. But I really think the key to understand it is that Rashi is not reading it with the same lenses that we might read it, or that the Ibn Ezra is certainly reading, that he's analyzing. He's not just reading. Right? So, what was that? Sorry?
Would you say that Ibn Ezra cares if it happened and Rashi doesn't care if it happened?
No. Ooh, that wasn't good. No, I wouldn't say that. Maybe explain more. I'm not really sure what you mean.
Does Rashi care about the reality? Does he?
Yes, I believe Rashi believed that when Chazal said this is what's happening, then he believed this is what happened.
Okay.
Personally, that's what I believe. I have no reason to think otherwise.
That's everywhere whenever he writes.
Now, I'm not saying that the Ibn Ezra, when he read this Mishnah, this Midrash, thought that. Right? It could be that the Ibn Ezra, could be that other more Sephardic / Muslim context rabbis would say, no, not really. That Midrash is not telling me what happened. It wants to give me a insight into Paro's psychology and all these things, right? Yeah. Wanted to say something, Teddy?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Answered it.
Because Ed, if you bring down a Midrash, and most likely Midrashim didn't actually take place, so then wouldn't that mean that Rashi doesn't?
There's Isaac Dweck.
Okay, fine. It's also the Rambam.
Who came first, Rashi or the Rambam?
Does that matter?
It does, because Rashi couldn't have had the perspective of the Rambam.
Okay, fine. Whatever. We'll talk about it later.
Okay. Motivating factors. So here we have unnecessary words or info, just unnecessary. So Teddy, go ahead, read this.
ויקח העבד 10 גמלים מגמלי אדוניו, וילך וכל טוב אדוניו בידו, ויקום וילך אל ארם נהריים, אל עיר נחור.
Good. So the Eved takes 10 gemalim of his master's gemalim, and he goes and he has all his all the good possessions of his master. Now, all that's important because we're going to see the gemalim are an essential part of the story. Right? This is with Eliezer, Eved Avraham. Sorry, Isaac, Eved Avraham. Don't want to insert any details into the story. And also, B'chol Tuv Adonav is important because we know that Lavan's going to make a whole thing of that. Right? So all these details are important, except one factor is not very important. And that is this. Vayikacha Eved 10 gemalim migimale adonav. Eved obviously isn't going to have his own possessions. So why does it need to say he took 10 camels of his master's camels? Right? It's repetitive. It's unnecessary. So comes along Rashi and says, migimale adonav. It's telling you that they had a different quality. Now we already know the backdrop, the midrash of Abraham and Lot fighting. Why? Because of the gemalim, right? The shepherds. Muzzle, no muzzle, that whole thing. So based off of that, it says, Nikarim shayu mishar gemalim. These were different kinds of camels. Why? Keep going.
Shayu yotzin zomemin mipnei hagezel shelo yir'u b'sadot acharim.
Good, they had muzzles on, and that's why they're gimale adonav. They're the gimalim of his master. They had a different quality to them. And if you see what is also motivating Rashi, so if you just have this isolated context, you're like, a little far-fetched, not in the Pesukim. But then you add another layer that when the Pasuk when Eved Avraham gets there, right, the Pasuk goes out of its way to say, Vayfatah hagimalim, right, and he unhinged or unleashed or opened up the gimalim. Now, again, you could say, that's talking about the saddle, that's talking about the things they were carrying. But why do you need to tell me that? Why does the Torah need to tell me? By the way, when Eliezer got there, he unhinged the camel's things, unburdened them. Unless it's saying, Vayfatah, he opened up their muzzles, right, so that they could drink the water, right? Now, once I have that, and two pieces of unnecessary information, right? The Torah is telling me, therefore comes Rashi and says, yeah, I'll tell you why the Torah is stressing it, because it wants to teach you something about Abraham, about his Gimalim, that they were muzzled because he didn't want to steal, right? So here you have Rashi saying that the pshat, what was actually happening here, is also coming to teach me a lesson, but the pshat is that they were muzzled, and that's not in the text, but it's in the text, right? It doesn't say, and he took the muzzled camels, but it basically says it by creating this little puzzle of unnecessary information, and now you, the reader, have to figure it out. Okay? Now, you might say, so why does it say that? Meaning, why doesn't it just say, right? Why doesn't it say that? Good question. Not for now. We should have covered that in our intro class maybe, but okay. So let's just, this might help us, Isaac, with your question, and this is what I was really trying to say in general. So I'll let you read this. This is from, by the way, I should mention, a lot of this shiur is based off of lectures given by Dr. Avigail Rock, Alea Shalom. Unfortunately, she died a couple of years ago. She was a Tanakh genius, very young, I think in her 40s. She actually gave a lecture for Tanakh study a couple of times, and she's very, very thorough. So anyways, this is a quote from one of her lectures. So go ahead. Rashi indeed
sees himself as a Pashtan, but according to him, Pshat has a wider definition, including giving significance to every additional detail. A method such as this is very demanding, as it requires the Parshan to justify every word and even every letter, which a strict Parshan usually dismisses as human vernacular.
Like what the Ibn Ezra would say, Rashi has to come up with an explanation. And that's where he uses the Midrashim and the Ma'amarei Chazal to come in and fill in the blanks. Okay. Again, here's just another example when the Torah gives the detailed dimensions of the size and weight of the jewelry given to Rivka. Why do we need to know how much her bracelet weighed? Why do we need to know, what her nose ring was made out of, right? What's that? And Rashi brings, again, remez of all different things. So we don't need to, it's just another example of when we have unnecessary info or words or something like that, where Rashi's going to jump and bringing the Chazal and saying this is something that we need to jump on. Okay. Now we have this is probably where the Midrashim get their most creative, we'll say. And this is the ones that people really remember from their childhood. This is when we have filling in the gaps in terms of a storyline, which means to say we have a story, something happens and something else happens, and if you're just following along on a simple level, there's no indication of a how or what happened in between here that can allow us to understand the story. So both of these are pretty famous examples. This one is even more famous, so I think we should start with this one. And it was in the morning, and behold, it was Le'ah. Now, Vihinehi is obviously something, shocking, something startling. What did you do to me? Why did you do this? Why did you trick me? Now, the obvious question is, how did you get to this situation, Yaakov? You just had a wedding. Didn't you know who you were getting married to? Didn't you sleep in the same bed as someone? There's a gap in the Torah that all of a sudden Yaakov agrees to marry Rachel. They have a wedding, and then it's Leah in the morning. What possibly could have happened here? And this is the opening for the midrash of, the famous midrash, that Yaakov and Rachel knew that Lavan was going to trick them. So they gave simanim, and Rachel gave Leah the simanim. Now that is such a elaborate story, right? That's such an elaborate backstory to what's happening, but you have to say something. It's very difficult to just go on like this, right? You have to say something. So Rashi brings down, and Rashi's just going to say, this is the midrash, and this is what happened. However, right, again, just to contrast it with someone else, right, the Radak, and he says like this, So he says, no, you know what, actually, the Torah is actually giving you a lesson here in proper conduct, that it's not appropriate to have relations with your wife in the light, and it's also not appropriate to speak to your wife during relations, and ... That's why Yaakov didn't know. That's why Yaakov didn't know. And the Torah is going out of its way to say, V'hinehi le'ah, because he wants to teach you that. Right? So you have two and the Radak is using it as some don't see it as so much as a pro for Yaakov, because they play on the word, like that Lavan made a mishteh, and that usually mishteh implies drinking. So that was how he didn't realize. But really, the Radak is saying, no, it's a praise for Yaakov. And Rashi goes in a different way to fill in the gaps. We have another one for Rashi filling in the gaps, and it's with the story of Yosef and the board. So, Vayashav Reuven al Abor, V'hineh and Yosef babor. How could it be that, why is it V'hineh and Yosef babor v'yikrat begadav? We just saw they were going to kill him. Reuven said, don't kill him, throw him in the pit. Then it says, Reuven returned to the pit, right? They go down to eat, they sit down to eat. Reuven returns to the pit, and they realize, what happened? What happened? And he goes back and they say, then he says to them, right? Where's the kid? What am I going to do? What am I going to tell dad? Basically, right? What happened? Where did Reuven disappear to that all of a sudden he's shocked that Yosef isn't in the pit? So Rashi says, V'yashav Reuven, which means you have to throw in a gap of time that they threw him in the pit, he left, they sold him, and he came back. Right? This is the Rashi is not so busy. Asukaya besako uvta'anito. He was too busy putting on his sackcloth and his ta'anit because he made the mistake by switching the beds with his father. Right? Now the Mefarshim and Rashi are going to go into detail about why did he pick these two examples? What are each example coming to teach me? Why do you feel the need to do this? But why do you feel the need to do anything is because there's a gap in the storyline here that is unaccounted for. And you have we already said this, it's difficult for Rashi because the Torah doesn't give me any gap in time. It doesn't mention any that he left and came back. However, what is a help for Rashi, and again, Rashi is a lot of times picking up on real nuances in the overall context of the story, the continuation, the previous, everything, is that who's the next speaker in the story? When they throw him in the pit, Reuven says, don't kill him, throw him in the pit. Then they have a brilliant idea to sell him. Where is Reuven in that conversation? Reuven seems to be the leader. He's the leader. He spoke up before. Right? He saved Yosef, saved his life. And then all of a sudden he falls off the scene. And who's the speaker? Yehuda. Now why not Shimon Velevi? Because they already gotten out in their father's good graces, so they're out of the picture. But Yehuda is the leader, and no one speaks against him. No one. So it's clear that Reuven is no longer there, and therefore we have to come up with an explanation of why Reuven would no longer be there. Good? Meaning, you understand this? Good? Okay. Let's do one more. Maybe this is my favorite one. We're doing this one. Okay? This is, and we said, I sort of alluded to this before, is motivating factors, which is filling in the gaps, but this time not with storyline, but with people. There is a general rule in Tanakh amongst Mefarshim and amongst general Chazal. It's called the conservation of characters. That basically, if there's a person mentioned, he has to be important. Meaning, there isn't a person who just exists, like Vayimsa'ehu ha'ish, right? Vayimsa'ehu ish v'ineto, but that ish is not just some random dude, right? And so Rashi, and this is, I think we'll really be able to appreciate Rashi's understanding of the overall Torah as a whole, and then there are certain things you can only understand when you understand the entirety of an endeavor, right? You can only understand certain things when you finished it, and then you read it again, knowing the end in mind, right? Sort of like L'Havdil, a movie, right? You finish watching the movie, then the second time you watch it, you understand all the smaller details that you didn't understand because you didn't know the end of the movie. So there are only certain things that you can really understand when you're reading Torah when you've read enough of the Torah that you have it in your mind completely, that you then understand, oh, I see what this is really this and this is really that. And this is a great example of that. So we have in Shemot Parashat, right? This is Parashat Shemot, right? Vayetze B'yom HaSheni, talking about Moshe leaving the castle. V'nei shnei anashim ivrim nitzim, two unidentified Hebrews fighting. Vayomer la Rasha. And again, we have a very strange thing that one of them is being identified as a Rasha. Now, why he makes him a Rasha, we don't really know, right? Rashi brings down the Midrash, right? If you raise up your hand to hit, you're already a Rasha, because he says, Lama taker re'echa. Okay, fine. And what's their response, or what's his response? Vayomer misa mechal yishar v'shofet alenu hargeni ata amer kasher ragta tamitzri vayira Moshe vayomer achenu hadavar. These people, whoever they are, their response is to question Moshe's authority, to say, who the heck are you? You know, are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? And Moshe obviously runs away. Fine. Rashi on the spot says, Shnei anashim ivrim datan va'aviram. Now, you read this in an isolated context, and you're like, okay, why are you doing this? Why is there a need to identify these people? But we're going to see that it's not just, okay, datan va'aviram, haha. Like, we need to identify these people, but there's a common theme here. And Rashi says, Hem shehotiru min haman. They're the ones who left over from the man. So let's go to the man. Moshe alem, ish al yoter mimenu ad boker. Moshe tells all of Bnei Israel. V'lo shame'u Moshe, vayotiru anashim mimenu ad boker, vayarum tolim vayivash. So you have the identification of anashim, and you have a direct rejection of Moshe's words, what Moshe is trying to teach them, just like over there. And again, Rashi on the spot says, now, this whole time, we still never met Datan and Aviram. Again, we only see them in Parashat Korach. They're only there in Parashat Korach. So we have to wait till we get to the end of Parashat Korach to identify them as who they are, and then learn everything what we can about them in Parashat Korach, and then go back into all these places where we identify them as Anashim. Before we do that, right, so you have Parashat Shemot, V'yomer Hashem v'Moshe b'Midyan lech shuv Mitzrayim ki metu kol ha'anashim hamvakshim et nafshecha. So you might say here, Rashi, come on, it says they died. Don't do it. Don't do it. But no, he's consistent. Ki metu kol ha'anashim mihem datan va'aviram. But now you actually have a problem. Chayim hayu ela sheyardu minechsehem v'ani chashud kemet. Right? They were really alive, but they weren't powerful anymore, right? Meaning they don't pose a threat to Moshe anymore because they lost all their money, and since they lost all their money, they're essentially dead, meaning they can't do anything to you, Moshe. That's what Hashem's telling.
He should have said they got tzara.
Oh, but then they would still pose a threat to Moshe. That's, again, we're not just playing with the terminology here, Teddy. But I appreciate you're paying attention. Good. And here we have the identification. And then look, we know it's talking about the Datan v'aviram. No. Ahole ha'anashim, ha'reshaim. Anashim, reshaim, mind you, anashim, lamara rasha. Boom, identification. And then once we have the first and the last being identified, anytime we have people that are identified as anashim, that are violating or disrespecting or transgressing and challenging Moshe's authority, they're going to be Datan and Aviram, because that's who they are. That's it. Now Isaac's going to tell me, no, but he didn't really mean that it was Datan and Aviram. He meant that it meant the character types of Datan and Aviram. It doesn't actually mean these people. Very nice to be a Rambam guy within Rashi. I appreciate that endeavor, but I don't think that's what Rashi is saying. I think that Rashi is really identifying these people. But that's not to say that, but let me just clarify that, because
Rashi's a black hat, Rambam's a white hat.
Well, yeah, sure. For Rashi, it's not just a game that, oh, these people are Datan and Aviram, and like it's a nice historical fact. You could still say that they're Datan and Aviram, and still also hold that Datan and Aviram also, because they're in the Torah, represent something greater. It's both. It's not just, it's not just, oh, it's not literal, right? It's someone that represents that. It is literal, but it also is something else. It's also deeper. It's also an identification of these people who represent something more, right? So we'll stop here. We have a couple more slides, and then we have just a machloket amongst basically modern scholars and the older ones. And then we have a couple of pieces. And then this slide I put for Isaac. He's going to like it. I had him in mind when I put it. And then next week, so we'll do some of that. And then next week, we're going to look into Rashbam, the grandson, and look at some of their machlokot. We'll look at him independent. And then hopefully we'll have time to compare him with Rashi as well. Good? Any questions?
Yeah, but I have to go, so I'll ask you later.
Okay, fine. Very good. Let me stop this recording. How do I do this? Ruth Aluf, do you have any questions? You had a question before. No?
Thanks, Ed.